Hey Nakul,
Hey Rishabh.
what's happening, man?
Going good. How about you?
You you've moved to New Zealand after many years in Amsterdam.
Yeah, man. Now that I'm speaking to you across the ocean, I feel I miss Amsterdam quite a bit, and Europe quite a bit actually.
What's the what's the tech scene in New Zealand like?
In, Good, interesting that you asked. There are a few very early stage startups happening. Largely, it's been Atlassian and Canva alumni who have come out and like funded a few incubators and accelerators, and they are having a few things like the latest one of the more recent one has been Dovetail that's been doing reasonably well, but yeah,
Yeah,
not as many as I know of Europe having.
wonderful. I'm so excited to have you. Of course, you and I go back a long way
Long way, indeed.
from our university days, and it's just incredible to see your journey. I remember from the time when you were working at Scan Cafe, I think,
Yes. Oh,
and then
wow.
from there Sloan, and then from there it's just been like a literally it's like an Oscar list of PLG companies, right? I mean, Databricks, Miro, now Canva.
So yeah, post MBA, I went into a large tech company called VMware. um, was an interesting time there because we were pivoting from an on-premise offering to cloud offering, and we had just decided at VMware that instead of competing with AWS, let's partner with AWS and Google. So there was a massive shift to SaaS offering. That was my first footing wherein I got an understanding of SaaS and all these things about PLG motions. And it was a very early on. We went to, I remember Jason Lemkin, we would have sessions with him, who then started SaaSter 2015, 2016. So it was a pretty interesting time that you had a backing of a large entity like VMware, yet a startup within the organization trying to do SaaS, which has now become VMware Cloud on AWS, as massive revenue within the organization and driving growth there. But that led me into the next string of startups. There was first Databricks, which with whom I moved to Amsterdam, and that's where I started my journey in Europe. I was there for a little over a year, and then came
So
across.
why don't you just tell me about like when you joined Databricks? Today,
Yeah,
obviously, Databricks is this. I don't know what their latest valuation is, $50 billion or something,
somewhere there. Yeah.
and they are the darling of the AI revolution, the modern data stack, like all the buzzwords, you know, seem to be going in their stride. Revenue growth is great, but like when you joined them, like what did the company look like?
Yeah, it was, for me, it was quite surprising that at that point, even they were quite keen about AI. An example was they do a yearly conference, which most of the SaaS companies do, and that was called Spark Plus AI in 2018. That was the first time it happened. That's when I just joined, actually. So they were that far ahead, and even then, they broke it down into. So I remember Ali was the founder and CEO. There were about six founders, most of them PhDs from Stanford and Berkeley, coming out of developing Spark, which was a platform for SQL performance improvements. And that's where the market was. More than a large majority of the segment was there, which Snowflake was eating up. So they had to compete there, but their eyes were always on the long term AI impact, and where they got in was the ML. So Mate, one of the co-founders, was like driving it pretty heavily with the open source yeah, contributions he was making and projects they were starting. So yeah, short answer, they were ahead of the curve. I wasn't quite sure. It was the company
Like how
was
many
very.
employees, rough revenue, like is what is the stage like?
They were, I believe, Series C at that point, 400 odd employees. Revenue was maybe high tens of millions, still under 100 million, or even significantly lesser than 100 million. But they were growing quite rapidly, and uh, there was no churn. Churn was non insignificant, if at all there was any. So that was what was the first few discussions I had had. I remember. So Renald was on. one of the co-founders was on the SQL side. Ali was the CEO, and when talking to them, these were the metrics we discussed actually, as well as to like because I was going to be the first PM in Amsterdam hub. There are only 8 to 10 employees there, and while I was there for a little over a year, we grew from about 10, 12 employees who had been acqui-hired from a startup acquisition there, grew to about 60 odd people with just one other PM hire. So that's how it grew. It was heavily engineering driven, which was very different to compare to all the other ones that I joined later, whether it was TripActions and then Miro and now at Canva, or TripActions now Navan. But yeah, that's been the journey. I don't know
Would
if you
you say
want
that like back then, did you at least have an idea about how big a deal Databricks would become at that point? Like not necessarily as a company, but just in terms of popular consciousness, right? Where it's such an important part of what's happening around just companies requiring more data, them hiring more data scientists, the stacks changing, modern data stack coming into
yes.
uh, sort of the limelight. Like at that point, was it clear that, and obviously now with the AI coming in, like was it sort of clear at that point that Databricks is really sort of on a massive growth trajectory? Because a lot of times once a company is like around a unicorn, you sort of start questioning, right? Like how large is the market really?
Yeah.
uh, so
It's a good question. If I did look back on that bit, there were two key trends which made me pick up the opportunity. One was it was a proven market in the sense that there was Hadoop, there is Cloudera, others who were on premise, right? And they were dying, but the market was there because everything was moving to cloud. The concern really was, will AWS and SageMaker pick it up? Snowflake was picking up pretty heavy. So that the market was proven that there's a need for this. Databricks picking up was a bet that I took. That was one. The other bit was primarily around coming from VMware. I knew how passionate IT admins were about the VMware stack. And this was the same thing that I noticed with Spark, with the open source project. So every time we would speak to customers, sorry, go
the word passion and IT admins, I've
ahead.
never actually heard it being used together, but all right, there we go. There's a first.
Well, I've been in this space now, and I am a huge proponent, and that's what probably we'll get into later as well. Like, what's the enterprise play in SaaS and PLG? And my big point to make there is how do you get IT admins to be passionate about your application? Or what you're kind of bringing to market. Like so, that's my end user persona that I am very passionate about, and so yeah, that's why I have a lot more empathy about that persona as well. But yeah, I saw that when Databricks was coming, and I remember early on this was the terms were new at that point when we were coining terms like splitting the persona into data engineer who looked at the infra side of the world and setting up data scientist and data analytics. So data scientist was going on the AI side, and data analytics was going on the SQL side, and the data engineer was going on setting up everything. And this was important for us because these roles didn't exist in companies when we went and introduced things. And if these roles were not built up well enough, this wouldn't get deployed, across the organization. And those were the things I learned at Databricks. Like, how do you get the right persona whose promotion depends on well deployed application, your application well deployed across the organization, and how you enable them to get that thing sorted. That's the enterprise play. Uh, the features are like checkboxes. This is the outcome really that you need to drive, which is what I've carried through from there to TripActions to Miro to now Canva, trying to be vocal about these things.
Yeah, yeah. So let's actually deep dive into what I really wanted to discuss. I think you've sort of crafted your career around this whole concept of enterprise products in SaaS, especially PLG companies.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because like when you look at the enterprise when you go to a pricing page of a company, right, and you look at the enterprise section, so there's often a free plan. There'll be one or two variants of some sort of a pro business plan, and
Yeah.
then there's enterprise.
Yes.
And the enterprise plan, I don't know, like 9 out of 10 times looks the same, no matter which company you look at, right? There
Yeah.
is some form of SSO, some form of added security,
Yeah.
maybe self-hosting. There is a form of collaboration, maybe.
Yeah.
There is a form of volume-based, whatever, could be a discount or something like that. And then there's like a human there, right? We'll
Yeah.
give you a customer success engineer, manager,
Correct.
whatever, right? Like that is the plain vanilla version of an enterprise plan. Sometimes there's added integrations or things like that, which also gets covered in the custom engineer part. But like broadly, like every company you go to seems like the same thing. And there's obviously like a lot of companies that have now literally been built on top of that, like work OS and stuff like that, which are trying to bring
Yeah.
in enterprise as an offering to companies, right? but
Yeah.
but like I'm just trying to understand that at the face of it, it looks on one side very, maybe boring is not the right word, but like definitely standardized. But on the other side, there is this thing around, is PLG just, an inevitable path towards the enterprise plan anyways? Because like I don't know of too many companies where the enterprise plan is not a major driver of revenue. Like are there companies where enterprise is like 5%, and like, self-serve is like
Yeah.
95%? Like I've not seen those companies, maybe at the beginning, but like would love to just, get your, to start off with, just what does enterprise mean? Is it a plan? Is it a philosophy? Like what is enterprise in the case of specifically PLG companies, where you have a self-serve motion and customer acquisition and all of that? Like what does the enterprise product even mean there?
Yeah. It's a really good and heavy question. What is enterprise? And I'll look at it from two perspectives or two examples. One is across, let's say, Databricks, TripActions, and Miro, how things were different from enterprise perspective, and what were the commonalities. And within Miro, what made us stick out as compared to, let's say, Mural, because early on there was hardly any difference between the two products. Let's say 2019 or 2020 when I joined, you had to really use the app for a few times, which is PLG, to really understand. Oh, Miro was like significantly better, but
Yeah.
Mural had all the checkboxes on compliance and governance.
Yeah.
Miro did not.
Even
I
even the name sounds similar.
Similar website, everything was very similar. I'll take those two angles, but both start from the same point, which is the customer and like we discussed earlier with the admin persona. Now there are a few different stages of the admin persona. When you are maybe a much smaller footprint in the organization, an enterprise organization, you might have a shadow IT. So no SSO setup. Some people just put their credit card down, and a team or uses a SaaS app. The next stage is that there is enough people in the team, and that person who is putting the credit card down is like, hey, I don't want to pay for all of these people who are beyond my department or team. And so they reach out to some IT admin who says, okay, like put in a request. The spend is really low, like under 10K or spend for them. So we'll just go through some vendor approval flow and set up SSO, which is like the check. This is when the checkboxes begin. Do they have SSO? Do they have audit logs? Like, okay, this is good enough. It's IT approved, but not wall to wall deployed or not approved for every single user to use this app. Then comes the third one, which is like, yes, this app is wall to wall applied, and we probably have an ELA, enterprise licensing agreement, signed with them. Now it is approved wall to wall, but there is dealt with budget. So now is finance and compliance and governance and IT admins, like multiple admin personas get involved. And when it is truly adopted by a significant group of people or like percentage of people in an organization, that's when it gets a dedicated admin to, let's say, uh, all the collaboration apps are owned by this admin persona. And they might have something like, let's say, Slack, Miro, Zoom, something else under there. Like they have like 3 to 5 applications, and they are primarily in charge of deploying and success of the application. So their promotion and existence in the organization depends on you. That's when they are the passionate people, like I was saying, passionate admins, and they may or may not be technical, right? So the reason I was calling through all of this was, as a SaaS product manager in enterprise, you need to build everything for the whole journey. Uh, and so the first person doesn't care about skin, right? The first person really cares about, can I put a credit card on and like get this going? The second person is like, do you have SSO, because my IT admin is needing this? Because IT admin has, and we need to understand, on an average, over 5,000 employee organizations have 300 plus SaaS apps in their environment. So they don't want to manage another 301st or 302nd. So how easy can you make that friction so that you then get a foot in the door and then use your PLG motions to expand and drive network effects across the organization? Now, this means very different things. For Miro, there was not a lot of hand holding you had to do beyond, let's say, setup of SSO, and maybe you have audit logs. But in case of Databricks, you needed that data engineer to like completely set up and deploy sensitive data that had to be piped through and then analyzed. So you need ACLs from day zero. You need data lineage. You need all these things on day zero. So enterprise was day zero, had to be ready and complete, and it was binary. With Miro, on the other hand, you could like go one step at a time. So where I'm coming to here was about how do you, it's all about prioritization on the right flow of these different personas and how much you invest in it at different points in time. And how you grow and scale. The more you invest in it, there is value prop of adding it as an additional revenue stream, an add-on SKU that Miro has now done. Just actually earlier this month, they launched, Miro Guard. Box has the same thing like Box Shield. So you can add that as revenue, but that's enterprise in one perspective, driving through journey of different admin personas. Coming to the second bit around Mural versus Miro. Now this is like side-by-side comparison of identical products, identical website. And this is my personal journey, so take it with a pinch of salt, as maybe it's not, I'm definitely biased in favor of one versus the other. And so this is getting into the specifics of when this happened. So this was pandemic 2020. I joined Miro May 2020. We were seeing.
What was your what was your charter like? And like, was it an IC role? Were you like managing a
Yeah.
team or?
So at that point, the enterprise team was about 8 to 9 engineers. There was one early product manager. He was like the 8th or 10th employee who was kind of shepherding it at that point. And him and I together said, hey, let's start out a plan. We need a roadmap. We need to figure out. We had a few sales, like I think 10 CSMs and like 12 salespeople. So it was a good team, which were inundated with insane amount of inbound requests to convert. We were at about 1.5 million monthly active users, and I think 10 to 15 million ARR, of which I think 20% or 20-30% was enterprise driven. So the large majority was still coming self-serve. So that's setting the context. We were
And how
losing.
old was Miro as a company at this point?
I think they were 2013, 2014 was when they started, so 6-7 years old.
Got
Yeah.
it. Wow,
Yeah.
long journey.
Yeah, they had been through a long, and so that's the other part, right? So they were 2020, they were like 150, 180 people. When I joined, they were 190. So within 3-4 months, they had already had 30-40 people,
Yeah.
heavily in the GTM side, and the enterprise team was completely new. They were only 3-4 months old.
And so when you joined, it was not yet COVID.
It was like February, March was COVID. I joined April, May.
Oh
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
wow.
So we were very much in the reactive zone, but we could see that this was like picking up like steady pace, and then it just and I'll give an example of my previous employer was also a customer of Miro. They went from 50 seats this month to 500 seats end of quarter to 6 months down the line 5,000 seats, and this was
Love
very
to,
common.
I'd love to be a sales guy in that company, right?
Yeah,
Like crushing your quotas and
it
yeah.
was it was quite interesting to see, but like yeah. Coming back to, right, like everybody was asking, what's the difference between Mural and Miro, right? End users, after having used it for a week or two, could make out the difference and loved it. But Mural was getting foot in the door everywhere. They had a few very good large customers who had backed them with a case study on compliance governance. They were way far ahead of. They were already on the FedRAMP approval path. It takes 3 to 5 years, but they had made significant progress, had reached a milestone. They could talk about it to customers.
What's
And
the FedRAMP approval path?
so for like federal customers in the US, from compliance perspective, you need to meet certain checks and like where is your data center and all that
Right.
fun
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's a long process, but like if there is intent and you made progress, like finance customers or regulated industries like healthcare come to you more because they know that they can be with you long term. That's how enterprises think, like not about next year, but the next 5 years, and
Yeah.
they need to make the right investment. Uh, so when we looked at this market, I remember like speaking to at least 2 to 3 customers every day to know what's going on. Um, what do they need? Why are they needing it? And so the unique thing that we found out at that time was IT admins were the people who were grappling with all these reactive things. Nobody was prepared to go completely remote all of a sudden. So they needed a trusted app that they could manage really well. So they needed scheme APIs. They needed audit logs, like the bare minimum thing. I don't want the complete compliance governance requirement that Mural was giving, but I need to manage the users that are growing like crazy on this application.
Could you just explain to the audience what SCIM is? Like people understand SSO, but like what's
Yeah,
SCIM?
SCIM is a standard protocol for provisioning and deprovisioning users. If you use Okta or Azure Active Directory, all of them do support SCIM, which what it really is a standard set of API which to add this user, remove this user, update user attributes.
Yeah.
So those kind of things through an application so that you get access to them and are not blocked from using the application.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the next step after setting up SSO that customers need to manage 5-10,000 users at scale who are creating IP on sensitive content. They need to manage who gets access to what. If somebody leaves the organization, they shouldn't have access. So when
Yeah.
everybody was working remote, you needed to manage them really well and their access really well. So we bet heavy on this, and within 6 months' time, we were winning every single deal where Mural was in conversations because of that focus on the IT admin. So this goes back to the same point about understanding which which admin persona is making decisions at that time. It could be a deal size or the cycle at which you are or the stage you are, or external environment that is making things different. Like right now, the things that are top of mind is AI. Do you have the right granular controls on AI? I do want my employees to use AI with your application, but is my data being used for training for you? Or can I control who gets to use AI and who doesn't get to use AI if I'm using your app? Those are the things that are driving differentiation with enterprise. And not, I mean, compliance governance, yes, is important, audit logs is important, but we need a very good story around how is AI being deployed on your app within my organization as a customer. So that gives an example of where this was going, if that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. One question that I have is, how at least on the PLG side,
Yeah.
or on the self-serve side, it looks like every few months there's a new innovation that growth teams, product teams need to be aware about, right? New tools, new kinds of features that become standardized. I'm assuming that's not the case on the enterprise side, is there? Because like it looks like it's the same set of features which were created many years ago. The vendors might change, but so like the question that I have is that when in your role, was it more about that, hey, the things that we can do, I'm already aware about everything, it's just about figuring out what to do when, and the prioritization, and maybe like the strategy, the architecture, working with the engineering teams, like was that the hard part, or was it around like how growth teams, you have a like growth teams, and even consumer product teams, they have a culture of experimentation. Try things really fast, try something, feature flags, all of that stuff, right? Like, does
Yes.
that stuff really apply on the enterprise product side? Like, is it like, are
To
there
some
similarities and are there differences? Like, would love to go deep into
Yeah,
that aspect.
that's a the more deeper I got into it, that's when I found out the nuances and differences in this. So Skim, even if you say, oh, Skim is we are Skim ready, uh, there are aspects around what attributes you support and how deep you go into the performance aspect of things. Same with audit logs. But that's just one layer. You also have to review where this is headed because it's also serving a job to be done. So if you take a step back, there is like Google and Okta, Auth0, they're all driving new paradigms and protocols that are meant for the next. Federated, what do you call, access controls are quite key around how do you manage a document in one folder with only view rights, but have owner rights in another team when you're collaborating with something else. Like these are all really difficult custom roles and so this might seem very boring, actually. For me, it's quite exciting.
Yeah,
But yeah, there are a lot of new things happening in the domain.
yeah,
Something that happened more recently that I would call out would be CrowdStrike. It created a new category in enterprise for compliance governance for extended detection and response. XDR. Gartner called it a new category of apps. Microsoft jumped in. It's driving massive revenue. Right? So this was detecting, for example, from a same session of a user, if they join from, let's say, Australia and join from China, is that account compromised then? And if it is
right,
compromised, how do we quarantine it? And how do you make sure you have least false positives on these things? And so we were working very closely with the best in class like Amazon and Microsoft and Okta and others to define access controls and XDRs and these kind of things, which are top of mind for enterprise. Because these are also very expensive concerns for enterprise. If an account is compromised, then in a regulated industry, you are liable to pay massive amounts of fines to the government in healthcare, in finance. So that's why it becomes massive and critical impact when you want to go there, and there's a constant innovation happening in the space if you go deeper. But yes, table stakes have to be met because large majority would be still doing the same things like SSO with SAML. But then there's OpenID Connect happening, where that goes, and Skim and others that are
yeah.
driving federated identity and those kind of
Yeah.
things.
Even just choosing the philosophy, I remember like at AppSmith we had to decide between, do we go with an R back or an A back
Yeah,
approach, and like, it's like a whole different rabbit hole that you
absolutely.
end,
Yeah,
and nobody is ever happy. You are always trying to figure out, okay, user experience versus how complicated am I making it, and
exactly. Yeah. Because
it
imagine
gets,
from the admin perspective, do I really want to define custom roles on the 300th app? Or, like, I understand this and automate it in some form and not worry about it? And that's the efficiency that an admin is looking for. So, yeah, I always like put the hat off of an admin who is dealing with my application and what do they prefer and want. And sometimes they do want granularity.
yeah,
And so, how do we enable that with ease? So, just how a growth person, a PLG person, looks at the end user and the onboarding, how smooth it is, when do they find the aha moment, what do they do after that? We have created somewhat similar flows for admins as well. And how can we? So, for example, this was, and because of the unique licensing model that Miro had, we invested heavily in a feature called request management. So you could request for a license, which could, and mostly request management is like an ITSM tool, like either ServiceNow or Jira. Between these two, it's about a large majority of the customers already covered. You can create automated ticket, which based on, let's say, your department gets auto approved if you have the budget for it, and you get access immediately. All of this happened within a second. You don't have to go into Slack and say, hey, I need access to this. Then a ticket gets created. Then somebody has to physically come and approve it, and it takes maybe even an hour. But that's the friction. As an end user, if you're like, okay, I'll just give up on this today. maybe tomorrow I'll come. And we wanted to minimize that as well. And we could see and attribute high degree of correlation that improving the request management, mean time to resolution of tickets, could affect in adoption and like the habit forming aspects of things, because then immediately get access, then I get excited, and then I explore new things immediately, because that's when I want to see what's happening.
What are some mainstream products that everybody knows that would not have this feature? Like, does Salesforce have it? Or like, I'm trying to understand, like, is this something like, what's the so what of that? Like, I get it's important, but like, like, were
Yes.
you guys amongst few amongst many who even went down a path like that?
Yeah, so there, yes, few customers like SaaS apps actually do it well. There are those that are doing it well. But here it's also about understanding which customer is doing it how, and how do you fit in to a wide variety of these things. So some customers preferred, and they're really good at managing everything over email. They have an email alias for 10 admins that they manage. This is how they get requests from all the 300 apps they have in their organization, right? But they're very good at it. They're very quick at it. And so it's more about addressing each of the unique flows that each of these organizations have built. And so our request management did like 6 different approaches to kind of addressing this. You could redirect the user to a URL that you pick. And some of them just created a Google form, which would create and have an Excel sheet of things. And then they would click and approve it. And they would do it once every day or something like that. So that's the question is about understanding. So nobody did it as thoroughly, I feel, as Miro did. We still had a long way to go, but we paused at some point wherein the return on investment was not the same. Like, for example, if I create a request now, it wasn't unique anymore. So I could create 10 requests and 10 requests would get generated. Ideally, I would want just one request so that I know as an admin when it's approved. So this is where we were like, okay, is it giving the ROI on this? Is it the right thing? Or should we even focus on something more critical that is like improving? Because there are always a long list of things that you could focus on.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are apps that do it pretty well. We actually learned about this from a couple of apps that customers said, hey, this does really well. Can you maybe just do this, what they do? It was like Smartsheet, which came a couple of times. A lot of customers were saying they do it really well. We love how they request right granularity of access you can do through the app. I was like, oh, okay. Then we'll learn about it and see how we can implement.
Yeah. The the other the other thing that I want to sort of, it's a good segue, is that like, when you also think about Databricks versus Miro versus Canva, there's also a difference in what kinds of companies they have, right? So one is obviously the persona, but the other is also that, like, one thing is primarily like more of a mid-market to enterprise tool.
Mm.
Other thing is something which is, starts very early, right? Like Canva is literally like, it could be a
Yes,
freelancer's tool, right? And Miro is like, you at least need like one other person.
correct.
Uh, and so, like, I'm just wondering that for the second set, the Canvas and the Miros of the world, there's obviously a lot of early stage startups which start off with PLG, start off with self-serve. At which point does it make sense to start thinking about the enterprise plan? Because typically the way it works with most companies is like the enterprise plan is sort of an afterthought, also because they'll they'll be like, these are the 6 features we want, right? And we'll just come to it later. Actually, in a lot of cases, sometimes you notice that it starts off with just this custom plan because they don't want to reveal their pricing, and then this mishmash happens where they experiment, come up with a pro plan, and then the enterprise just becomes
Yes.
something for volume discount. I don't know, like, is there any advice or framework on like just how and when should they start thinking about it?
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, especially given the times, and this was going back to your first question you had asked about what is PLG and enterprise like, and why is it dead? Is it dead? Kind of thing. I mean, yeah, the market is definitely tight from investment perspective, but as well as the economy is pushing a lot of customers, as like enterprise customers, to tighten budgets, which implies consolidation of vendors. which is where the concerns are around, like, yeah, purely PLG, and when do you transition to enterprise, need to be reviewed. I don't have a very clear answer on it. Maybe I don't know. That's why. But I'll share what I've seen across the 3, 4 different startups at the stages. One part, it definitely depends on the space you're operating in. Like both Databricks and TripActions were very different. They were meant for business, so they had to find a way in. Databricks was Spark, open source. Put it out there, you have massive adoption. Enterprises started adopting it, were contributing to the open source, and sooner or later, the companies come in and say that, hey, you can operate within this walled garden, don't go out there. And hey, Databricks, can you give us like enterprise support on this with all the features we just discussed, right? SSO, skin, data lineage, all that stuff, right? So that's how Databricks was operating, open source. TripActions, on the other hand, was this market of business travel was predominantly Concur, Agencia. These are like really old players
Yeah.
which didn't have great UI experience. So that was a key. So they were looking at the pain point that was happening there. Second bit was who is willing to take a bet, which is SMB and mid market. So up until recently, like a couple of years ago, the large majority of the market was SMB mid market, which is when they then began challenging the enterprise market and going upstream. So the deal sizes were low. So then you start focusing on very different things that you need to get the foot in the door. And so for them, it was from day zero. There's no freemium option. There's nothing happening. You know that this industry has to operate by going into the customer market. So you need early adopters who love it from, and they go to next company and then become your proponents and those kind of things. That's how TripActions was pushing it. Miro and Canva are uniquely different. At the same time, they've both done the PLG motions for the end user focus and started enterprise at a very different time. So Miro started maybe, like I said, 10, maybe under 10 million ARR is when they, and another way to look at it, because this predates me when Miro started investing in enterprise, my time at Miro. But what I heard was about when you first get your early, a few 10K ARR deals is when you start kind of investing in motions around enterprise. Because those are the customers who are looking for a high touch flow, or your product is a little more complex, which you saw now with Databricks, right? So you need to explain, or you are a category creator. So maybe your employees get it, but as an organization, they don't get why do we need Miro again? So that's where they came in. Canva, on the other hand, has come in much, much later. We're just starting enterprise now. So it's been predominantly user driven to the point that there were no collaboration features for 2, 3 years ago when they started the Teams plan. Now they're going into the enterprise world. So there is gradual growth, and that's the aspect to like going from an individual user using the app to building a network effect with collaboration, and then going upstream into enterprise where there's a clear value prop of using the application. That's what I've seen work really well. I don't know if that answers your larger question.
I think it's really interesting because the plans are related to the size of the company. Like the worst thing that can happen is that an enterprise customer ends up signing for the self-serve plan, and you
Right.
end up cannibalizing the enterprise plan. And
Yes.
so like the feature packaging becomes like really important. I know Miro has done a lot of work around just experimentation, not just around the pricing but also the packaging. And remind me about Canva. Miro has a user-based pricing, right?
Yes.
Like with seats and licenses, and Databricks was obviously like consumption and like there was usage based, and there's this entire talk around how the entire pricing model is changing. Like, does user based mean anything? And now you're hearing about people talk about outcome based stuff with AI
Right.
coming in. And so I'm just sort of wondering, all of that is sort of like a precursor to the enterprise plan anyways, right? Where everything is negotiable, and
Yep.
there are sort of custom plans. I'm just sort of wondering, like, what do you make of all of this? Like, do you think firstly, like, do you think seat based pricing is is that the discussion that you're seeing, that that's going to change completely because there's
It
enough people talking
it
about that?
depends. I feel I saw Miro succeed pretty well on the seed based, while Databricks was doing phenomenally well on consumption. I know Miro was reviewing consumption based options. Uh, so yes, the consumption based model makes a lot of good points over seed based. And example here is things like these apps are adding significant value if used consistently. And just how PLG Motion is trying to tell you that, well, you can see the value once you try it a few times, and that's why it's product led, and that's why users are willing to pay for it. The same extension goes into saying that yes, if they see value in it, they'll keep using it, and that's why it's consumption based, should be paid.
Yeah,
Why should enterprise just pay on seats, kind of thing? And we did see significant. That's why we had Miro had unique. That's I touched on it earlier that we had unique licensing model. This evolved because of these use cases. So we had, I think, different points, different types. So we had free user license. This helped us significantly to onboard. Remember, I said like 50 to 500 to 5,000. There was no cost. So if you have set up SSO with just in time or pre provisioning with Skim, it just like exploded like wildfire within the organization, the app, because everybody could get access and they are free. And they could auto upgrade to a full license. So as soon as you take an edit action, that was the differentiation, you could upgrade. Right now comes in the whole true up conversations, which would happen either quarterly or every 6 months, wherein we would go in and say, our sales team would go and say that, yeah, we'll be good partners with you as a customer, and we won't charge for whoever is inactive, even though they're consuming a paid license. They probably took 2 edits in the last month. We won't. So let's downgrade the 90% to a free restricted license, which was uniquely different and Miro-esque. I hadn't seen it anywhere else. And free restricted would be that you cannot then auto upgrade again.
yeah,
The
yeah,
value of this one cycle was that a user could see the benefit without friction of Miro and get that aha moment if they were. And once they did get that aha moment, they would continue using. And then we don't have to convince the admins that, well, there are actually 800 people getting value out of this. They are
yeah,
editing more than 3-4 times. Then we had day passes, which were 24-hour license that you would give out to people, which had a lot of issue managing at scale. Because this was meant for, there are leaders who come in for quarterly business reviews and they need access to the tool that you're using at that point.
yeah,
And because we were all remote and distributed, Miro was the tool everybody was using across the board in an organization if it was approved. It was a blessed
yeah,
place to come and collaborate and do strategy planning sessions and those kind of things. So for them, day passes were more critical because they didn't want to pay at scale for all these people.
yeah,
And then were the full license. So this was like a whole thing. What we took away from that at a later point and reviewed, we did away the day passes and replaced it with guest users. And this was more about not the budget, but the actions that they can take. As a guest user, I don't want them to do like create a team or create a board. They only get access to edit in this board. Those
yeah,
kind of things were more concerning because when you have consultants coming in and doing things within your organizations, we want to give them edit rights because that's when they can be productive. But we don't want them to messing around with a whole lot of other things. So
yeah.
those were the things which changed. Canva, on the other hand, has only one license. That's where a few other companies do it, like Google. It's one single pricing across a suite of products, and then there's massive discounting happening at scale.
And as far as you're allowed to reveal, there's no existential question around, do we need to change our pricing at Canva and stuff. Like, it's like, at least on the pricing,
No, no,
I don't
yeah.
mean actual numbers, but I mean the model itself, right? Like, are there discussions around, hey, do we want to at least explore other options, or is this like, hey, why spoil a good thing kind of thing, right?
Both are being discussed, but I don't know. I can share more than that bit. But yeah, both points are being discussed. Which would be the
Interest.
case in any scenario because you need to be
Yeah.
competitive against like the players in the market.
Let's move to the other things that I want to cover around Europe. You obviously spent a lot of time in Europe. What was it like working for an American company in Europe and then working for a European company in Europe? What was that like?
Yeah, Europe was quite interesting. I hadn't anticipated before moving there. Silicon Valley was like the obvious choice in my mind, and I never even considered relocating to Europe ever. Until this Databricks made us move. A year, 2 years in, I was like, why did we not consider doing this before? Like, this seems a lot better. And there are a few things I want to call out there. One is, I think most of Europe had better policies for getting in high skilled labor or talent coming in after the 2008-9 global meltdown. So one of the things that Amsterdam or Netherlands had was like something called 30% ruling, which was that the first 30% of your salary is tax exempt. It was going on for 8 years. They reduced this to 5, and now they're, I think, discussing to reduce it further. But that kind of helped like bring talent in. Second, there is like pretty low corporate tax in Netherlands. So many of these US startups were basing their second office. That's what Databricks did in Amsterdam, because there's incredibly good talent across Europe. And at that point, at least, we felt that SaaS wasn't that big. But while I was there for 3 to 5 years, there has been this whole crop of incredible SaaS companies that have come across different hubs in Berlin, in Paris, in Amsterdam, London, across the board, even beyond, which is quite fascinating to see for me personally, and across spaces. And one of the key aspects that I now look forward to, considering again at some point potentially moving to Europe again, is Europe was slow to adopt SaaS and cloud when US was adopting significantly. What it did was this new crop of SaaS startups that have come in are able to now go in and replace certain things because there were existing problems which were not catered to for European context. For example, there were certain regulations that needed to be met, and large enterprise tech companies were probably not kind of catering to those. So I see a lot of niche vertical SaaS startups coming in addressing those, whether it's SMB mid-market customers or like really large enterprise customers which are in regulated spaces. So these things are coming in and slotting themselves in and replacing these big tech American companies, which is quite
Yes.
fascinating for me to see.
And is there a difference between working for an American company in Europe versus European company in Europe?
I don't know if this extends, but like for me, there were good and bad things. The good part was it seemed the American companies that had an office in Europe were a little more diverse from nationalities perspective. May not be the case actually always, and maybe they were well funded, so they could hire people from different places and move them to a certain central location, kind of thing. The bad part was that the time zone difference. If I worked in only startups while I was in Amsterdam, so when I was at Databricks, like there was massive time zone difference between the Bay Area and Amsterdam. And startups being startups, you got to be so that I couldn't enjoy the European life, which is why I kind of considered moving to TripActions and then to Miro, which was a much better work-life balance.
Yeah.
And so those were the benefits. But Miro was quite diverse. Not sure if what I experience at Databricks and then Miro translates beyond, but yeah, for whatever it's worth, yeah.
Interesting. And what about the South Asian, or in your case, the Indian factor? Like, did you, when you first came to Amsterdam, did you, like, over the years, have you seen a lot more Indians come in? Like, for example, I know that there were a lot of people from our university, BITS in India, that have joined Booking.com
Right.
in Amsterdam, and a lot of our friends have joined companies like Uber and stuff. Like in London, obviously, I see the number just explode. Is that something that you were noticing in Amsterdam as well? Like, just more and more Indians coming, like first generation immigrants coming to Amsterdam.
Yeah, I would say I think Booking started this in Amsterdam 2 or 3 years before even I had moved there. So there was a good community of South Asians or like Indians there. It did move to a whole new level while I was there. So I was pleasantly surprised to find old friends coming down and moving and relocating. It had become a very thriving place for like connecting with people and also wanting to start up in the space. This is yeah, it changed significantly from the time I went in. And one of the very unrelated things which I measured this by was like my wife and I are vegan for the last 4 years or so. When we
Right.
moved to Amsterdam, there were hardly two vegan restaurants, I would say, like or maybe three or four. London is much better from that perspective. But over the last 5 years, there were at least a few tens of such places. So that's how a similar trajectory. There's nothing related to SaaS and Indians moving there or others, but I would say that that was a similar change that happened when we moved in 2018 to now 2023 or 4. There's a lot more people, a lot more interest in startups, a lot more funding coming in, a lot more maturity in things, having more structured deal flow and like scaling and people
Yeah.
sharing insights, which I had seen in the Bay Area before, now happening in Europe.
Yeah, that's something that I've been noticing as well. It's just incredible just to see both the rise of South Asians in Europe, and at the same time, and probably the result of a lot of funding and scale ups happening, because I think Europe did not have that many scale ups, new age
Correct.
scale ups in the
Yes.
past. So probably they did not require that talent. And now that, companies are crossing 100 million ARR or a billion in GMV and things like that. And like, I was seeing like, I think Europe attracted what, 45 billion in venture capital, which is equal to China.
It's huge.
That's massive, right? And like,
Yeah,
who's going to be building these products if not for Nakul and his buddies,
Rishabh.
right? It's quite interesting to just sort of see this move. And you missed the other part about around the time that you were there. It was interesting to see that the Dutch team qualified for the Cricket World Cup after a
Yes,
long time. So
it's incredible. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I'd become
they
quite.
they played pretty well
They
actually.
did. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I was
it
quite
was.
proud of that. Yeah. Over a period of time, I had begun becoming a lot more, gaining a lot of Dutch pride in a lot of things.
And I know that you obviously enjoy New Zealand a lot, but hopefully, at some point we'll get to have you back in Europe.
I would love to.
Thank you so much for the time, and hopefully everybody who's watching this, took away something interesting and valuable. So
Thank you,
thanks.
and congrats as well as kudos to you for creating this forum and platform. I really look forward to all the other folks who come onto your platform and learning from them as well and listening to them.
Yeah, very excited. Thanks a lot, Nakul. Okay.